This is a LANPWR. I'm sure that stands for LANPWR battery. It's 300 cold cranking amps, which is 50 less than my SLA battery it's replacing. It has 5.1 amp hours, and I'm hoping this will handle the cold starts with the closer specs to my lead acid battery. You can see it's the same size, just a little bit taller. And the footprint. My Cuckoo battery, I've only had to jump start it once in freezing temps, and that's a 250 cold cranking amps at 4.25 amp hours. I'm hoping the extra capacity of this LANPWR will be able to turn the engine over and not struggle so much in colder weather. I'd like to see a 350 cold cranking amp sodium ion battery to match what I'm replacing. The higher capacity sodium ion batteries aren't on Amazon yet, so if you want one, you got to pay ridiculous shipping costs. So hopefully within the next year, we'll see more 350 and higher cold cranking amp Powersports battery versus the lower cold cranking amps made for more like an ATV with a 700 cc or lower engine. Whereas in the summer, I didn't have a problem. But we'll give this LANPWR a few weeks and see how it handles the sub-freezing temps. So here's the Cuckoo I had in there compared to the LANPWR. And a Cuckoo, I'll give you kudos for being first on Amazon to have a sodium ion battery, but you need to come out with at least a 300 or a 350 cold cranking amp. This is fine in the summer for my application, but even though it has more reserve than a comparatively sized lead acid, you need to have a 350 cold cranking amp, at least 300 like LANPWR has, to be competitive in the side-by-side UTV market. This is fine for an ATV, but you need something a little bit larger. Also, the LANPWR, it has a tapped battery post versus having to retrofit this Cuckoo with a rectangular nut. So this is slightly taller than the stock battery. So all I have to do is remove these rubber grommets, and then this will fit perfectly. It still has the rubber coating on the hold down bracket, so it'll work fine. All right, this is the first startup with the LANPWR battery. It's 25 degrees. Show it's minus 10 out. Gotta try and do this before my hands freeze or my phone dies. Minus 11. Voltage is really low. Won't even crank over now. Nope. Got my jumper pack on it. Let's see if it starts with that. This thing is draining power fast too. So I have a theory about these sodium-ion batteries. They have a linear discharge, unlike your lead acid and lithium iron phosphate. They'll pull out full discharge until zero capacity. But as you use it, the voltage drops in a linear fashion, whereas the other batteries will try and maintain 12 volts. As this drops in volts, it increases amps, which is a problem with solar power. But as you can see from my attempts here, each successive attempt, it seems like it's getting more power to the starter via amperage. Both these batteries that I've been testing, the Akuku and the LANPWR, they do fine in warmer temps. No problem starting. But they don't live up to their cold, below freezing claims. To be fair, I'm not really comparing apples to apples, and that's the manufacturer's fault. None of these initial offerings from these companies are serious entries. You know, to compare apples to apples, I need a 340 cold cranking with 20 amp hour, and comparing a 250 cold cranking and 4.25 amp hour. And then on the LANPWR, it's better. It's 300 cold cranking with I think 5 amp hours. Until these companies offer an apples to apples model so I can compare it to the lead acid, this testing's sort of moot. Now, to be fair, they have started in extremely cold weather, but it's taken like the 6th or 7th crank, and that's killing my starter. What's happening is, the first crank, they barely engage a solenoid. And if you research sodium-ion batteries, their output is 100%, but it's linear. With your lithium iron phosphate and your lead acid, they put out 12 volts up until the point almost failure. Whereas with the sodium ion, it's like a linear curve where the voltage drops, and to compensate, the amperage goes up. And you'll notice in my cranking tests that the first crank barely engages a solenoid. As the voltage drops, the amperage goes up, and you'll see the starter kick over 1 or 2 revolutions, and by the 7th crank, it's a lot better, but that's hell on your starter. So what we need to see is these companies offer, they offer them in the European market and overseas, but for some reason they want to cheap out on America and not offer the higher amp hour models. So I'm going to crank this here, and I can tell you that it's probably not going to kick, even in these above freezing temps. It's going to barely crank over, but as I do the 2nd, 3rd, 4th crank, it'll be much better. So 37 degrees, voltage looks pretty decent. Let's see if it cranks on the first try. No. But now on the next try, it'll crank a little bit better. It might even start. No. And my lead acid battery, this would kick over no problem in above freezing temps. Now, this is sitting overnight. If I go on my, start this, drive 1 mile and go on my walk, when I start it after that, it's pretty much fine. But the initial start sitting overnight, and it hasn't been freezing tonight, last night. It's one of the few nights we have a slight warm up this week, and it's in the 40s. Yay. So you can see that, third or fourth crank, it cranked over really nice. It's the exact opposite of a lead acid battery, where lead acid battery, if it fails on the first crank, you're pretty much done. Whereas, with the sodium ion, you pretty much have to get used to, it'll start, but at a 7th or 8th crank. And it's something to get used to. And who knows, maybe in a month or two, someone will release a 20 amp hour, 350 cold cranking amp battery that we can test apples to apples, and it'll crank on the first start. But, the reason why I bought these is for reliable below freezing temp starting, and they do start, but it's not worth the trade-off of beating up my starter, with 5 crank attempts. So you can see how small this battery is compared to the lead acid. And if you look at the dissection videos, these guys can stuff more cells into these batteries to get the amp hours. I don't know why they're cheaping out. But, if I was going to make an entry into the market, I would make sure my first entry overperforms, not underperforms. So give us more cells to increase the amp hours. And that's the thing. Your typical automotive charging system isn't going to charge you to full capacity. I mean, we realize that. So by increasing the amp hours, the capacity, it doesn't have to be a full charge. It'll have the reserve. But the cold performance with these initial offerings is just dismal. And I would not buy these batteries until these companies offer something that can really do the job in real world without killing your starter.